Hey Eagle fans, it's EaglefanKarl, and we are on the verge of another NFL season, just a few days away again till we have real football. I'm sitting here in my Super Bowl champion shirt, drinking from my Super Bowl champion mug, and we're almost ready to start the season back up in defense of our Super Bowl title. So what better way to really do this than to look at whether or not going into the season, how much of a chance the Eagles have to repeat as Super Bowl champions. And one of the things I really like about this shirt, I don't know if you can tell, but on the back it has the whole roster of all the players that was on the team last year. And one of the exciting things about that is the fact that there's some guys on there that, probably didn't contribute much, but still were able to get over the hump and really finally get that ring and get a championship. And the first guy that comes to mind, of course, is Brent Celek. And I want to share a few thoughts about Brent Celek because he's been one of the players I've really loved on this team for a number of years. And of course, he announced this week, made it official that he was retiring from the league and that Super Bowl 52 was actually his last game. You see behind me one of the pictures that is one of the most memorable plays I remember him making, and that was in the Snow Bowl. My cousin Steve and I were at that game at the link. Seeing him make the catch at the end where he got the first down and was able to just slide into the snow, knowing that they didn't want to score the touchdown, they just wanted to get the first down so they could run the clock out. He could have gotten to the touchdown, but being the team player he is, he takes the slide and makes a memorable shot for everyone. Sliding in the snow like that, but that was sort of the victory slide that we had for that particular game, and it was an exciting moment, and I'm always going to remember exactly that he was that kind of a player. He was a team player. He didn't care about his stats. All he wanted to do was win, and so for that reason especially, it was great to see him go out on a win. And it was also great to see that he did get a touchdown in the Rams game, so he did get one more touchdown in his last season, so that's exciting as well. So really, kudos to Brent Celek for a great career. And if you want to know anything about Brent Celek, it just comes down to this in terms of what kind of an Eagle he was. There are reports that, given the fact that Jason Witten had retired, that the Cowboys actually had approached him about signing for them to play for them this coming season, and he refused to put on that blue star. He said he just couldn't do it. There was no way he was going to be able to play for that team. So in our hearts and minds, I think he's always going to be one of the Eagles we're really going to cherish, and the memory of seeing him win a Super Bowl is going to be something that I really appreciate. Let's go ahead, though, and get to the main meat of what I want to talk about in this video, and that is whether or not the Eagles can repeat. And history says that really history's against them in this quest to try and repeat as Super Bowl champions. The league has really changed, especially over the last 20-25 years. And if you look at the list of Super Bowl champions, I'll go ahead and put it up there. The list of Super Bowl champions that have repeated. What do you notice about that is the numbers of the Super Bowls that they're repeating in. So many of them were in the early years of the Super Bowl. Specifically, teams have repeated as Super Bowl champions 8 times. 6 of those are from Super Bowls 28 and earlier, and whereas there's only been 2 since then. Now, Super Bowl 28 is the 93-94 season, and what's important about that season? That's the last season before free agency and the salary cap as we know it really started. And when free agency really started in 1994, I think that really changed the dynamics of the league. And no longer were you going to be able to build sort of these dynastic teams that were going to be able to compete for several years. So it really, I think, changed the way the league is set up. And everyone talks about parity and anyone can beat anyone on any given Sunday. That has really taken shape since free agency has gone in the way it is now. So the last time a team, of course, did repeat there, as you can see, is Super Bowls 38 and 39 when the Patriots did it. But if you even look at discount Super Bowl 40, if you look at Super Bowls 41 to 52, so the last 12 years, there have been 10 different teams that have won the Super Bowl. So it's not that just the teams aren't repeating. Teams aren't winning multiple Super Bowls within 5 to 10 years. So really, if that is the one thing that also really sort of stands out at you, the only teams that have repeated over the last 12 years are the Giants, and there was 4 years in between theirs. And then, of course, the Patriots had only one season in between Super Bowls 49 and 51 when they won. So really, it sort of is striking the fact that it's not just that teams aren't repeating, teams aren't winning multiple Super Bowls. And I think, once again, that goes to the roster turnover, how quickly teams can get good, how quickly teams can get bad. And so it really just, I think, underscores a lot of that. The other thing that I found really interesting that I read this week, a stat that really jumped out at me, was they were talking about the quarterback salaries. And when you talk about the salary caps, many times quarterback salaries are eating up so much of it that it really is hard to get then quality players at other positions. And if you look at the quarterback salaries, they said Drew Brees was the first quarterback to go over $20 million a year. And since he did that, no team that has had a quarterback on their roster that was making $20 million in that season has gone on to win the Super Bowl. Even when the Patriots won it with Tom Brady, his salary was below $20 million. So it's amazing to me that you sort of have that, and I think it really is going to bear out when you have a lot of these contracts that have happened in the last few months. You think of Kirk Cousins and what he got in Minnesota, and of course just this week with the news that Aaron Rodgers and the big deal that he got. It's really going to be interesting to see if those teams are able to compete in the long term with those contracts on their books, because it's going to be harder for them to keep other talent. And we all know that in the NFL, you can't just win with one player. And in fact, as we know as Eagles fans very well, you can lose that quarterback and still win the Super Bowl if your roster's good enough. Getting back to the whole dynamic, though, of teams not repeating and all, though it's not just that teams aren't repeating as Super Bowl champions and not winning multiple Super Bowls. That's even happened in the NFC. If you look at the last 12 years again, there's only been 2 teams that have won the NFC and gotten to the Super Bowl twice. And that was, of course, the Giants and then the Seahawks. So it really, I think, is remarkable when you look at the league as a whole, and especially how the NFC has been over the last several years, that it has been difficult for teams to get back there year after year. And of course, to win the Super Bowl, you've got to get to the Super Bowl. And I'll be talking about the NFC a little bit later in this video, but I think it's really remarkable when you look at that part of it, that it's going to be difficult for a team to get back to the Super Bowl when you look historically, once again, at what has happened over the last 12 years. So does that mean the Eagles have no shot? Of course it doesn't mean they have no shot. They've got a really good shot. First of all, on that whole thing with the quarterback salaries, the Eagles are still in a great position because Carson Wentz is still in his rookie deal. But there's another reason why I think the Eagles fans can take a little comfort in everything, and that is, of course, to win the Super Bowl, you've got to get to the Super Bowl, and to get to the Super Bowl, you've got to make the playoffs. So let's look at the fact of whether or not the Eagles can make the playoffs this year or not. And I think that really goes back to the division and how winnable this division is. And I think it is very winnable. And everyone says, well, you know, the Eagles have a real hard schedule this year. But the fact of the matter is, the division as a whole has a hard schedule this year. One of the things that the NFL did several years ago when they realigned the divisions into 8 divisions is they came up with an easy scheduling tool that basically 14 of your 16 games are set before we know what they are out several years. So 14 of those 16 games are set because they're set by which division you play in. There's only 2 games every year that are determined based on how you finished the year before. So the fact that the Eagles have a difficult schedule is going to be reflected in the division as a whole is going to have a hard schedule. The division as a whole has to play that NFC South where 3 teams made the playoffs last year. So we're all going to have to play that same gauntlet of games. There's only 2 games that the Eagles have that are different than what other teams have, and that is the Vikings and the Rams. Now, the Rams is a legitimate game. The Vikings, I'm still not sure exactly how good they're going to be this year. And when you look at the fact that Aaron Rodgers is going to be back for the Packers, the Vikings probably aren't going to be the best team in that division. That's in my opinion. When you do the breakdown, though, and look at the different teams in the division and what their schedules are, I went through and did a quick W and L on all of them, and that's what I came up with for the division in terms of how I think we'll finish. Some people might be shocked to see that I have the Cowboys as low as I do. I have the Cowboys a little lower because I think they're really going to struggle to move the ball because they really just don't have playmakers aside from Ezekiel Elliott. And it's not really hard for teams to game plan against you when you're one-dimensional on offense. And if that team gets behind, it's really going to hamper them. So I think for that reason, I think the Cowboys are not going to be as good as a lot of maybe the prognosticators think. I think they're going to have a down year. So for that reason, I think that the Giants, like I said, I think are our biggest competition in the division this year. Now, the one interesting thing in all this is you talk about the last time a Super Bowl champion repeated was 2003, 2004. The last time the NFC East champion was a repeat was that same season, 2003 and 2004. And who was that? It was the Eagles. So, you know, a lot of things, there are streaks for reasons, but most streaks eventually come to an end. So I'm gonna go out on a limb and say the Eagles are gonna go ahead and repeat as NFC East champs, even though that has not happened historically over the last several years. So I think the Eagles will have no trouble getting to the playoffs based on that. I do think that they'll go ahead and win the division. The question then is, can they get back to the Super Bowl? And that's where I think the real difficult part comes in, is because the NFC is really tough. It is stacked with a lot of good teams. And that, I think, is going to be the biggest hurdle we're going to have to overcome. And that's one of the reasons why this opening game against the Falcons is so important, because where those playoff games are played in January is probably going to dictate who goes to the Super Bowl. Yes, teams go on the road and win in the playoffs, but it is really hard to do, especially when the teams are very close in talent. And I think that's going to be something that we're really going to have to look at games that we have against the Falcons, against the Saints, against the Rams. You're going to need to win those games to really get tiebreakers that are going to be in your favor when you get to the postseason. And that's sort of one of my concerns with this is right now, I think we're in a difficult situation as it relates to that first game against the Falcons. But that's for my next video. I'll get into my whole prediction there. As it relates to my point about the NFC being dominant, though, just take a look at the quarterbacks. If you look at quarterbacks in this league, I'm a firm believer that especially when it comes to winning in the playoffs, you're as good as your starting quarterback. Are there teams that are going to go far because of their defense and stuff like that? Sure, there are. We saw that last year with the Jaguars and Blake Bortles. But ultimately, it's hard for those teams really then to win when you get into the playoffs. So if you believe in that axiom that you are only as good as your starting quarterback, I went through and I ranked the top 10 quarterbacks that I think are in the league right now. This isn't for their career, so there are some guys you might not see on this list that you know, are probably career-wise better than some of the guys on this list. But that right now, that would be my rankings for the top 10 quarterbacks in the league right now. I did give some deference to guys that have had success in the postseason, so that's why you'll see someone like Russell Wilson a little higher on the list. But those are guys that are still in their prime of their career, so that's why you're not going to see a Ben Roethlisberger or an Eli Manning on this list, because I think they're on the tail end of their career and really question how much they have left in the tank, so to speak. But the thing, when you look at that list of the top 10 quarterbacks in the league, according to me, 7 of those 10 are in the NFC. So I think that just goes to show just how stacked the NFC is, that they have that many guys that can do that much damage and really make a difference, I think, when it really comes down to it. Now, of course, we all know as Eagles fans, though, you don't have to have a top-tier quarterback to win a Super Bowl, because we certainly did last year. We did it without even our starting quarterback. But that was in large part because of what our top 10 quarterback did to position us to have home field advantage. You know, a lot of people say, you know, Nick Foles is the one that won that Super Bowl. Yes, he was, but I don't think we win that Super Bowl if it's not for Carson Wentz. If Nick Foles is our quarterback from day one, that does not happen. Because Carson Wentz is the one that really set us up to get home field advantage, which then was able to propel us to getting into the Super Bowl and allowing Nick Foles to have that great performance for the ages. But that said, if you don't like the whole idea of quarterbacks, then, you know, do you prefer power rankings and where teams and where some of the media is ranking teams when you look at exactly how good teams are? I went through and I looked at 5 different power rankings, and they all came out within the last month or so. Some were before the preseason started, some were within the last week. But I looked at 5 different organizations to really get a feel for, you know, exactly what we're looking at in terms of power rankings, and I did a composite of those. The 5, by the way, that I used were NFL.com, ESPN, CBS, USA Today, and Yahoo Sports. So those were the 5 that I was able to find easily and was able to quick put them into a composite and give them points based on that. So if you were in first position, you got 10 points, 9 points for second position and on down to get a composite of those 5 for, what would end up being a top 10, or in this case, I'm going to show you the top 9. And I'm using top 9 because those were the teams that were in every one of the 5 power rankings. So of the 5 power rankings I looked at, they all had these 9 teams ranked somewhere within that. Another common one that was in there that you won't see on here is the Chargers. But of those 9, 6 of them are in the NFC. So I think that right there goes also to show you just how good this conference is. 6 of the 9 top teams are in our conference. But I think, like I said, it just underscores the whole idea of when it comes to the NFC, I think it's really going to matter where we're finishing in the final rankings and whether or not we're going to have a first round bye, whether or not we're going to be playing home games when it comes to, especially the divisional and the NFC Championship game. Obviously, if we win the division, we're going to have at least one home game. But, where are those games being played is a big question. I don't think 11-5 is enough to get you, it might be enough to get you a first round bye. It's unlikely, but it might be enough to get a first round bye. But I do think that it's going to be, I think it's going to make it difficult to get home field advantage. And for that reason, I think it's really going to be hard for the Eagles to get back to the Super Bowl even, let alone try and win the thing. That said, I think that the one thing that this team all has going for it, I've listed a lot of factors that are going against the Eagles for repeating, such as, the conference that we're in and, the trends that show that. But there are a few things that are sort of counter trends that sort of help us. Number one, I already mentioned the thing about the quarterback contracts. We are on the better side of that, where we're not paying so much money to our quarterback. The other thing that really sort of sticks out is I talked about free agency. There wasn't a lot of turnover at the top of the roster as it relates to the Eagles. We really were able to keep most of our roster intact, and if anything, we're getting a few guys back, so that roster is even better. The problem you've got with free agency generally isn't that, though. It's usually the other fact that other teams are also improving. So that's the other factor in all this, is you can't just think of what the Eagles have and what we're getting back. You've got to think about what other teams are doing and how they've improved their roster. So, like I said, winning those conference games that could potentially be tiebreakers is going to be really important. I frankly think that the Rams are probably going to be the team to beat in the NFC this year. As far as the Eagles are concerned, that's the team we're really going to have to make sure we beat. And that's because I think the NFC West is going to be down this year. I think it's a poorer division. They also have to play against the NFC North. And I think the NFC North has a lot of good teams in it. So you're going to see, I think, the NFC West really take sort of a down year. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised to see two or even 3 teams from the NFC North get into the playoffs, because they'll be beating up on that bad division all year. That's, and the Rams, of course, then have 6 games against those teams. So it's for that reason that I really think when we go out to LA to play the Rams, that might be the game that decides the conference, because whoever wins that game is going to end up probably potentially hosting the NFC Championship game. So do I think the Eagles can repeat this year? Absolutely. I think the Eagles, they have the talent certainly to repeat. The question is going to be where those games are being played in January. And for that reason, it's going to be really interesting to follow the Eagles this season and also the conference as a whole. So we'll be taking a look at that as we go through the season. And of course, there's always the possibility. No one this time last year would have thought that the Eagles and Rams would be teams that would win their division and be competing for a Super Bowl last year. So there's going to be some teams probably that are going to come out of nowhere this year and going to do the same thing. So it'll be interesting to see how that all goes moving forward. Like I said, I'm going to check in later on with my prediction video for the Falcons game and finally make up my mind of which way I'm going to go in that thing. But until then, fly Eagles fly.